purpose for us doing this is so that we can see each other's faces, so we can keep in contact with each other as researchers and scholars, and also to hear from some of our amazing faculty around campus. And we've had just the great pleasure of learning and hearing from so many people before. So for example, if you missed last week, you missed a really interesting talk on bone biomechanics and forensic anthropology research. And if you're interested in seeing that episode, you can always go to our website where we have the YouTube link where you can see that. So just a few housekeeping tips before we start. I've got 3 to share with you. The first one is to make sure your mics are muted until the end when we're going to open it up for questions for everyone. The second is if you're interested in having the particular speaker enlarged on your screen, then you go and find the speaker's name, look at the 3 dots next to the person's name, and you pin him or her, and that will show them enlarged on your screen. And then finally, something we're adding this week is that we are recording these episodes, so be careful about what you say and how you say it, because it will be on YouTube most likely forever. But we will also, if we choose not to post it on YouTube, you can always get in touch with our office, and the video clips that we've prepared in advance will always be available. But the entire show, you can get access to that by going to our website. So our schedule for the next hour is the following. We're going to see a short video by our presenters, Brett Katzman and Sean Ellermeyer. And then after that, we'll do a live interview with Brett and Sean. So I'll start off with a few questions that I've prepared, and then we'll open it up to the other participants. And so if you want to ask a question, you can either just unmute yourself and pop in during that segment, or you can send a question through the chats function of Teams if you have that available to you. I know not everybody does. So usually what I do is I go to the chat questions first, and then we'll open it up to the live group. Okay, so let's start the show, right? So we have 2 presenters today. I'm very pleased to share with you. So Brett Katzman is a professor of economics in the Michael J. Coles College of Business. Brett also serves as the Associate Dean of Research, and he is the chair of the Department of Economics, Finance, and Quantitative Analysis. Brett received his PhD in economics from Duke University and has been a member of the KSU faculty since 2001. And Brett's research is in the area of game theory. Yay, that's my favorite topic, microeconomics, and more specifically auction and bargaining, which we're going to hear about today. Brett is joined by Dr. Sean Ellermeyer, and Sean is a professor of mathematics in the College of Science and Mathematics. Sean also serves as a chair of the Department of Mathematics. Sean received his PhD in mathematics from Emory University and has been a member of the KSU faculty since 1993. Sean's main research activities lie in the area of differential equations, which we're going to hear about today, dynamic systems, mathematical modeling, and more recently, game theory and auction theory, as he has been doing some of the work with Brett. So again, these are fantastic researchers here at KSU. We specifically chose them for this show for 2 reasons. One, they represent an interdisciplinary team, which is what we're all about at KSU. And second, the work they do really is research with relevance, which they'll share with us. So we're going to now show the video clip. Heather, I'm going to turn it over to you. Okay, so we've hit the same snag as last time. So Heather, you're going to need to restart and maybe choose a different streaming. All right, that's okay. This just keeps us on our toes. Let's try it one more time, and then we'll switch it over maybe to Joelle or, but just try it one more time, please. So Heather, it might be that your mic is muted. So unmute your mic and then try it again, please.
Okay.
Auctions have existed for millennia and have been used to sell a wide variety of items, ranging from treasury notes to Dorothy's ruby slippers. When it comes to auction, people usually envision a fast-talking auction who solicits progressively higher bids until the end when he pounds his gavel and says going once, going twice, sold to the highest bidder. But what most people don't know is that there are actually a wide variety of auction types, each with its own rules and subtleties. Principles of economics tells us that supply and demand help a market set its price, so why hold an auction in the first place? Well, the basic idea is that auctions are used when there is not an established market for the good being sold, and the auction provides a way of discovering the price. And the price that is settled on greatly depends on the rules of the auction, from which there are many to choose. Most auction rules we see today have been honed over the years based on successes and failures. Economists study these rules by using mathematical models and experiments to predict what will happen as rules change. Should bids be cried out in the open, or should they be submitted secretly? Should there be a reserve price, or should it be an absolute auction where someone will win no matter what the price? These are just a few of the questions that auction theory tries to answer using mathematical models. And that's what led me to start working with Sean Ellermeyer from the math department. Medicare had introduced a rather complex new auction, and no one was quite sure what the results would be. So I began analyzing the model of the auction and came up with a fascinating but tough differential equation. Stuck, I reached out to Sean in hopes he could help.
Brett Katzman and I got together for lunch one day at the Commons because he wanted to show me a differential equation he'd been studying. He wanted to know if I thought I could solve the equation, or at least try to discern some of the properties of its solutions. At the time, I didn't know anything about auction theory. Even though I had no idea why this particular equation was being used to model an auction, I decided that I'd take up the challenge of trying to elicit some of its mathematical properties. My experience with differential equations and mathematical modeling provided me with many of the tools that I needed. But in order to really understand what was going on with that equation, I realized that I actually had to learn a lot more about the economic and game theoretic principles that were used in formulating the equation. That's when Brett and I started working together very closely, with each of us teaching the other new things as we went along, so that we both had a firm grasp on both the economic and mathematical aspects of the research we were doing.
Auction theory is rooted in equilibrium analysis using game theory. Game theory has been used to understand the survival of species, to strategically plan for the D-Day invasion at Normandy, and yes, even to design auctions. The basic idea about game theory is that it asks not just what someone should do in a game, like what to bid, but also how their competitors will respond to what they do, and in turn, how they should respond to that response, and how they should respond to that response to their response, and so on. Now, I know that this is starting to sound like a scene from a comedy, but in the end, the mathematics involved actually allows us to predict where everything settles in. And that's what we call equilibrium analysis. By examining equilibrium under different rules, we can determine how a specific rule will affect outcomes by changing it and only it. Will it increase revenues? Will it lower costs to taxpayers? Will it lead to high quality, low cost construction firms winning government contracts to build bridges? Mathematical modeling holds the answers.
Mathematical models have been used for centuries to try to understand phenomena in so many different areas. Classical problems in science, like the motion of the planets in relation to one another, spread of a disease. All these things can be studied using mathematical models. But with the development of game theory in the 20th century, we could start modeling human interactions. In particular, game theoretic models can be used to investigate the overall societal outcome that results when individual people who are motivated by their own self-interest interact with one another. So whenever you develop and analyze a mathematical model of an auction, the goal is to better understand how participants in the auction behave in relation to one another. How will they bid, and how does the outcome depend on that bidding? We're trying to create a crystal ball of sorts, not only so that we can predict what will happen in auctions, but so that we can design better auctions.
So I've already mentioned that there are a lot of different types of auctions, but why so many? Well, many you see today, like those at Christie's and Sotheby's, have stood the test of time. In a sense, they have won the survival of the fittest because they've generated a lot of revenue. Others have come and gone because they failed to deliver. Still, other types, such as eBay, have cropped up with improvements in technology, taking the good aspects of the going once, going twice type auction and making it to where you don't have to gather everyone in a single room in Manhattan or London. In fact, eBay provides a great example of how auctions can evolve and improve over time by introducing new rules, examining how they impact outcomes, and then keeping them, removing them, or tweaking them based on the results. But not everyone trying to auction something has the luxury of experimenting over time like eBay. Sometimes the seller wants to get revenue through a single auction and has to decide what rules to use, and there's an immediacy to it. In such instances, mathematical modeling and experimental labs prove useful. Those that know what they're doing or consult someone who does usually end up with good results. But those who try to make up their own rules often face catastrophic results. I've seen beachfront property in the Bahamas sell for pennies on the dollar and silent auctions devolve into fistfights. But these pale in comparison to what could easily be the worst auction ever. And that's the Medicare auction used to set reimbursement prices on home medical equipment that Sean and I studied with Dr. Peter Crampton from the University of Maryland.
The Medicare auction sets prices on things like oxygen tanks, diabetes testing strips, and ventilators. To try to make sure that enough medical equipment was supplied, the Medicare auction selected multiple winners in 100 major metropolitan areas. And although that was normal enough, the way that the auction set prices led to some winners facing reimbursements that were below their costs of provision. That is an unsustainable situation. Bidders cried foul about the outcomes, but Medicare simply saw that as sour grapes about low prices and refused to accept that the prices were too low to be sustainable. And that's where our work came in. Our research provided mathematical evidence that the auction was poorly designed and would lead to market collapse. But more importantly, it also showed that the auction could be easily fixed.
So you might ask why the federal government would pay attention to a bunch of mathematics coming out of Kennesaw State University. Maybe other economists could come up with a rival model. After all, the famous joke says that if you stacked all of the economists end to end, they couldn't reach a conclusion. Well, that's where it gets interesting. Based on our results, our co-author Dr. Crampton collected signatures from 244 of the world's leading auction experts on a letter to President Obama, Congress, and the Department of Health and Human Services. The letter highlighted the problems with the Medicare auction and urged a restructuring based on best practices. We simply could not find a single expert who disagreed with our conclusions. The auction was just that bad. But more importantly, the letter got traction that 10 years of congressional testimony by Dr. Crampton and I couldn't. The letter caught the attention of Representative Tom Price, who introduced legislation to change the format in 2013 to something called the Market Pricing Program. It was an auction based on our research. That bill lost steam when Dr. Price was named to head the Department of Health and Human Services, but it ended up being fortuitous, as it meant Dr. Price didn't need a congressional mandate. He could just change the auction from within. And that's how a simple discussion about differential equations in the commons helped overhaul one of the largest auctions in history.
So thank you very much for that. So an economist and a mathematician meet in the commons to talk about differential equations. That sounds like the beginning of a joke right there, Brett. Are you there?
Yes, it does, doesn't it?
It sure does. So I want to ask you, and Sean, come on, unmute your mic so we can see your face too, and talk a little bit so you'll pop up.
Hello?
Yep, I can hear you.
Okay.
Yep. Okay, so my first question is for Brett. So I think my favorite line in the whole video is, let's see, I've seen silent auctions that have resulted in fistfights. So I feel like we need to hear about that story.
Oh, that's a great one. And just a little background for those that don't know auctions as well. A silent auction is something you usually see at a charity event. People hold them when there's so many items, it's just not practical to put them all up in front and do the going once, going twice type thing. And so what you usually see is either a piece of paper next to each item where you write down bids and those get progressively higher, or maybe a fish bowls where you write down kind of a private bid and you put it in. At the end, they look and see who's the highest. So this one with the fist fight, though, was actually a company that was moving and changing buildings but didn't want to move their furniture, so they were trying to sell all of their office furniture. And so what they did was they put a piece of paper on for people to write their name down in their bid, and they got progressively higher. And this was scheduled to end at 5 p.m. one day. Well, about 4:55 p.m., people literally would write down their last bid and lay over the piece of furniture and the piece of paper to where no one else could outbid them. And that was poor design. There shouldn't have been an ending time. There should have just been this will end as soon as nobody has placed a bid in the last couple minutes or something like that. But I seriously saw two ladies, in fact, start punching each other because one would not get off the bid sheet.
So I've been to a couple of auctions that are run by museums, by art museums, and I've seen the same kind of thing where they say it's going to close at a certain time and people just start swarming like sharks around that. If I were setting up an auction for a nonprofit, for any type of nonprofit, what would you recommend as best practices for an auction?
Well, great question. The real one of the really big questions is whether, as I described, to have people write things down on a sheet of paper or put them in kind of a confidential bid in a fishbowl type thing. If you use the fishbowl, people won't be waiting to last minute because it doesn't really matter. Your bid is what your bid is, and you don't know anyone else's bid. So that has a positive aspect. At the same time, you run into this problem where people don't really know whether they won or not. And those auctions are usually followed by the going once, going twice type auction for really big ticket items. And so people aren't sure what they've won yet. So they're hesitant to bid on the big items because they only have so much. And so it really depends what's being sold, how much is being sold, and how much time you have. And in the video where it talks about rules being important, that's what an expert would do. An expert would find out all of these parameters and then suggest what the benefits to one type and the benefits to the other type are to try to hone in on what's going to be most successful for the charity.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good, thanks. And so I think you all demonstrated a really great collaboration between two colleges at KSU. What are the next steps? So you were very successful in changing Medicare policy. Are you still working in the area of Medicare policy, or are you moving into other interesting areas?
So I still work in Medicare policy. Sean and I have not been doing much research on it lately, although there's still some really interesting questions mathematically we talk about and would love to publish someday. I've actually been working with HHS over the past 2 years, helping them with the redesign. Dr. Crampton moved to Germany for 6 months, and it really left me as the only economist who understood the auction completely. So I kind of got lucky and they used me. Sean and I continue to work in auctions with some of our colleagues. We actually have 5 different people in our department now who study auction theory. They study other things too, but it really is a nice critical mass to have. And we're getting some really interesting and well-known results across the entire department.
I'm going to switch over to Sean in a second, but to just follow up on what you just said, where are you publishing your results?
So the paper mentioned or discussed about Medicare
was an Economic Inquiry, which is a pretty well-established journal. You're an economist, I'm sure you've heard of it. What we tried to do between Dr. Crampton and I, and then with Sean on the mathematical stuff, is spread things across really good academic journals and practitioners' journals, because this was important not just for economists and mathematicians to nerd out over. This is really important to get the idea that this was a really flawed auction that could have some really dire consequences for seniors. And I think part of that strategy helped convince HHS and CMS to change their ways.
And just for the record, Brett, I never call myself an economist when there's an economist in the room.
We think of you as an economist.
All right, let me switch over to Sean. So Sean, can you tell us if students have been engaged in either the work that you've been doing in mathematical modeling or the work you've been doing with Brett?
Well, sure. So over the years, I've had students engaged in other mathematical modeling work, not having anything to do with auctions. I currently have two very good high school students who are actually working with me on problems related to auctions, not related to the Medicare auction, but these are our two students actually who placed very highly in our statewide high school math competition that's hosted by the math department every year. And so I worked with them all of last summer, and also with one of the other auction theorists that Brett mentioned, who's in his department, Dr. Jesse Schwartz, who I see is here today. Hi, Jesse. And so we worked together on some research last summer, and these two students will be working with us again this summer, and we hope to get some original publishable results out of it. And we already have gotten some. And so, yeah, we're involving some good students in this.
That's fantastic. And to the mathematical model world, which, you know, anyone who's been watching the news lately has been getting lots of glimpses into mathematical modeling around pandemic. And I know that there's a couple people who are watching today who have developed their own models. I know that the College of Engineering hosted someone who came in this week, an expert that came in and shared with us his mathematical modeling. So I guess I'd like to hear from you as an expert in this field on what should we be looking for as a consumer of the news in terms of the credibility of these models, and where might the models be different from each other in terms of the parameters?
Right. So, I mean, the models, as you know, all predict different things. So you're talking about the models for COVID-19. So, you know, when you develop a mathematical model, there are parameters built into it. And those parameters are trying to reflect the different factors that go into what's going to cause the disease to spread. So, you know, for example, the degree to which people are social distancing would be one of them. And all these parameters are built into the model. And just a slight, if one of those parameters is estimated not quite correctly, since these models are predicting what's going to happen over a period of time, just very small changes in the parameter could result in a vastly different prediction about what's going to be occurring a month from now. So it's not at all surprising that these models are differing in their predictions, and in fact, that's what the model is all about. It's based on, well, here's the parameters that are built into the model. If they are such and such, then this is what should happen. But again, if they're off slightly and someone's estimating those using data, and the estimates are off slightly, it's going to result in possibly a vastly different prediction of what's going to be happening 2 weeks or a month from now. And so that's very different than the kind of model that Brett and I studied, in which we're just studying things that are set, the rules of a game. And so the kinds of predictions that the models that Brett and I work with in auction theory they don't sort of suffer from that. But so it's, again, any model is not correct. It's trying to mimic something that's happening in the real world, or what you want to learn about something in the real world, but working within sort of the more perfect world of mathematics. So it's only a reflection of what's going to happen.
These are the quotes that I will think about when I go to bed tonight. The perfect world of mathematics.
Yeah.
Totally agree with you.
Mathematics is the perfect world where there are perfectly straight lines and perfectly round circles, and
Totally agree. So I want to open it up to questions from the audience, and remember that you can send in questions through chats, through the chat function of Teams if you don't want to come on live.
So this is Ian Ferguson. Maybe I'll get things started. So you talked about the Medicare one being flawed. So I've been involved in building in that, where a lot of those are sealed bids. But in those sealed bids, you pre-qualify people so they don't bid too low through the process of pre-qualification. So my question was, did you have some form, or did they have some form of pre-qualification that may have ended up with a better outcome, or was it an open bid?
This is a great question. In fact, they did have pre-qualification, but they created a different problem that most the type of auctions you're talking about don't run into, and that is that the type of auctions you're talking about usually require some type of bid bond, to where if someone wins, they cannot just walk away from it. Medicare did not impose any type of bond or down payment. And what happened is people did exactly what you honed in on, was submitted absurdly low bids so that they become a winner. And then they just had the option of either sticking around if things turned out okay, or just walking away. And it was the fact that people walked away, one person wasn't going to affect the results, and we don't have to get into details of that. But when multiple people did it, that's really what sunk the thing. That and what led to that was kind of a messed up pricing rule as well. But yeah, so it's kind of related to the pre-qualification. Pre-qualification doesn't do much if you don't make sure that every bid is sincere, I guess you could say.
Yeah, so in building, the place where you get whacked if it's not right, don't know if whack's the correct term, the correct technical terminology, but you then get hit on the back end with time and materials for anything that isn't quite right.
Yeah, so a lot of times in construction, the amount you bid, and I'm sure you know this, is not actually what you end up getting paid, because you can appeal that there were overruns and things like that. This auction did not have that property. Whatever price was determined by the auction was going to be the price. And so you can kind of see what happened if a builder was having cost overruns but wasn't going to be reimbursed, they may just walk away from the project. In this auction, that's exactly what they did. When that price ended up coming in too low for some bidders, they just walked away and left the market with an undersupply. Remember, this market is literally 80-year-old people, 70-year-old people who need oxygen at home. So undersupply is a very serious thing. But it's almost exactly as you describe, except now take out the ability to charge for overruns.
So right. Yeah, thank you.
Sorry. Thanks, Ian. I'm going to jump in for a second. So, Brett, I'm someone who does quantitative research to inform policy. And unfortunately, so much of the research that I've done in my lifetime has done nothing to inform policy, right? And so I would really like to hear from you as someone who has been successful. How long did it take from the beginning to where you actually saw impact? And did you ever get to a point where you're just like, no one is listening to me? Or,
I'll answer the last question first. Yes. So I started studying this with a health economist colleague of mine at the University of Miami in 1998. And mind you, HHS just in the past 2 years asked me to help them reformat it. I visited Washington, I can't even count how many times. Even worse was, because I wanted to maintain credibility, I never accepted $1. Whereas I probably could have charged a lot, but then I don't think HHS would have listened to me. So it's been a labor of love. and good citizenry, I think. But over 2 decades. And yes, many times I was like, I'm just done with this. Nobody will listen. It's almost worse than nobody listening. People who had turf to protect would give some of the most illogical reasons in response to what we were telling them. And it became very frustrating. It really was. And just by sheer coincidence, Tom Price, who was a representative from Kennesaw's district, I've never talked to the man. I don't know that he knows I exist, other than his people would get a random email from me. And I talked to one of his staffers over Christmas vacation in my KSU office. But pure happenstances, he's the one that really got the change moving. So it's just one of those little quirks that happens.
Yeah, window of opportunity for those people who are political scientists. Any other questions from the participants? Just to let you all know, Math is Cool has gotten out there because we've had a record number of participants, 160 plus. So thank you for that. Questions? So I did see a question that came in related to George, and Sean, I see that you're responding through chats. This is a tricky one, but you're our resident expert on mathematical modeling, and so I think we are interested in knowing your expert opinion. And if you haven't seen the models and haven't been looking into them very carefully, that's fine too.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's really just what I said before. I mean, a mathematical model is really never claims to be perfect. So it never claims, well, this model says this is what will definitely happen. It's more like of an if-then thing. So it's more like if these parameters in the model are estimated correctly, then this is what should happen. Okay, so it never claims that it's this will happen kind of statement, but it's and so whenever you hear predictions, like on television, the people that are making the predictions are making assumptions about that the parameters have been estimated correctly, and they're making a guess that this is what the values of these parameters are, and they're going to say, so this is what's going to happen, right? So that's just the way mathematical models work. So whenever you hear people who speaking very confidently, this is what will happen, they really don't know. Yeah. They really don't know. So the answer is, the question was, are the models reliable and valid enough to open up Georgia? We don't know. I mean, maybe I guess the governor's interpretation, whoever he's listening to, are saying yes, it's safe, and they may be right, but nobody knows. Nobody knows. No.
So, but I think a good point that you made that might have gotten lost is the time element. And so we talked about this a little bit earlier this week, which is that these models around opening up Georgia the models are forever moving because things are changing so rapidly by time. Whereas your model, as you said, didn't rely on time as a significant element. Is that, am I describing that?
No, yes, of course. So the differential equations that we studied in studying the Medicare auction are static. They're not predicting some time evolution of something. They're just trying to predict what an equilibrium is for a certain game. So it's a completely different kind of model. Models that are predicting the spread of a disease are models that are predicting time evolution of something, right? So here's the way things are now. Our model says this is the way it's going to be in the future, because this is what the solution of this differential equation says will happen in the future. But again, if you start off at a different place, then something different is going to happen. And so the question is, where are you starting off right now? Do Is the data that we have collected right now accurately built into the model, and has it been estimated correctly? And so the correct answer is we do not know.
Right.
So was Governor Kemp correct? Maybe. Maybe we'll see that he was. Maybe it was the wise thing to do.
But let me play devil's advocate just for fun, because this also came up in the chats, which is I think that you have clearly described why there's so much uncertainty around these mathematical models in this particular case on COVID-19, because it's related to the time element. But that also suggests that perhaps we shouldn't be using mathematical models to inform the policymaking. And again, I'm a policymaker who relies on quantitative data. So how would you argue that point, that mathematical models are still important to the decision-making process, even though there's this high level of uncertainty with so many of the parameters?
Yeah,
Boy,
yes.
I feel like I'm arguing my own point, but anyway, I'll leave it out.
So they are just a tool, mathematical models are just a theoretical tool. Again, the whole idea behind mathematical models is you're taking a real world problem, you're translating it into this sort of perfect world, which is abstracted from reality, doing math, working on it, and then retranslating back. So it's just going to give you, again, it's a tool. So the idea is like, well, this is what would happen in the perfect world. And so, and it's amazing how often mathematical models do tell us things about the real world that, that actually do shed light onto what's happening in the real world. So, there's no harm in using mathematical models for everything, but you have to understand what they are, that they're not perfect things.
Okay, fair.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to completely switch gears, and this is not on our sheet of paper. What's the guitar in the background there, Brett?
I actually, after we talked the other day, I thought I should have told you that. That guitar is a Gibson Les Paul Standard, mirrored top, signed by Slash from Guns N' Roses. It was given to me.
I was going to ask you, did you win it in an auction?
In fact, no, I helped Leukemia Society put together an auction that Slash and other rock and roll people donated things, and they gave me that as thanks. And I actually made a big donation because I didn't feel right taking it just for free. But yeah, it's one of my favorites.
Okay, other questions related to the topic or not from the participants?
I saw a good question that kind of flew by on the chat about whether it was a reverse auction or not. So somebody knows some of their stuff about auctions. A reverse auction, I think what they mean is rather than trying to get higher bids, you're trying to get lower bids. Like that might be the case if the government's trying to hire somebody to build a bridge. You're looking to pay a lower price. And yet the answer is yes, it was that, but actually it was that type of auction combined with the fact there were multiple winners. And so the CMS was trying to set lower reimbursement prices than the prices had been before. And the prices before were simply an artifact of lobbying efforts and were ridiculously high, even by the industry's comments. They knew they were making good profit, but they knew it wouldn't last forever. The prices were just too high. So yes, just to answer that question, it was what you might call a reverse auction, which is just trying to get lower prices. But fundamentally and mathematically, they're virtually the same, whether you're looking to get higher prices or lower prices. You just flip the math on its head. So, right, that was a great question.
Okay, here's one. Do you do any research that is related to auction theory and the stock market?
Tangentially. Stock markets have bid and ask prices, and that's something called a double auction. And I have done a little bit of work on double auctions theoretically, but nothing that examines how it ties to the stock market specifically. Believe it or not, we just had a job candidate last Friday who we're trying to hire to work jointly, once again, interdisciplinary, with Jennifer Priestley's institute. And he gave a presentation where the data used was from financial double auctions. So No, but maybe I will if we hire this person.
Other questions from participants? Yep, there's a comment in there, not a question.
Well, there is a great question. If you don't mind me mentioning, just because it may lead to other collaborations. We have some really good experimental and behavioral people in our department, like Lucy Ackers, James Boudreau, Ann Gillette's, who focus on economic and financial type experiments. But they're experts. They could probably do a whole lot of other things if someone's looking for kind of experts in the field. And auction experiments are actually something done all the time when you can't really hold an auction but you want to predict what will happen before you hold an auction. One thing you might do is run an experiment. In fact, our paper has kind of a corresponding paper based on experiments run out of Caltech by a guy named Charles Plott, who's very famous in that area. And I think that probably contributed to our success in changing the thing as well.
Oh, here's a tough math one coming in from Lisa. Sean, do you want to take that one?
What are some other similar applications of differential equations? Could enumerative combinatorics be used? Let's see. Can enumerative combinatorics be used? I don't see. Oh, I have to hit see more. Similarly, well, the models of auctions very heavily rely on probability because there's a lot of probability built into those models, because when you're competing against other bidders in an auction, you don't have complete information about who they are. You don't really. Everyone sort of has a private, what's called a private value, a private valuation of what it is that you're trying to compete to buy or sell. But so therefore, it's enumerative combinatorics. So going into probability, there's a lot of combinatorial ideas. So there really is combinatorics used. And
Sean, as part of on that, since ranking bids becomes important, we use a lot of the statistics. We use order statistics.
Order statistics, right.
Combinatorics play a big role in the mathematics behind order statistics.
Yes. So you're always so yes, you definitely there is combinatorics already involved. There's a lot of different math involved that goes into this. It's amazing. This was nice.
I like this next question, so I'm going to jump in and ask it. How long did it take, because this really speaks to interdisciplinary research, how long did it take to learn each other's lingo? Was the commonality in math, game theory helpful in the ease of collaboration? And before you answer, I just want you to know that, I come from the world of public health and policy, and when we hired economists at CDC back in the day, there was an absolute disconnect between how economists thought about their quantitative analyses versus how an epidemiologist thought about it. And my job was to bridge the gap between the two. And so that is a unique thing. That is a unique thing in all of our fields. So I'm really interested in this response.
Do you want to go? Let me start, and then Sean can offer his. Look, very fortunately, my PhD program taught me a lot of math, so I think I more or less spoke Sean's language. I wasn't as good at it as he was, but I spoke it. So what we had to do was turn Sean into an economist. And we had some absolutely fantastic meetings. We would literally reserve a classroom over in the old math building and spend 4 or 5 hours in an afternoon running through the theory of order statistics. And then he'd say, well, wait a minute, what about this? I bet, that could be a really useful tool later on. And it was like, I don't know, it's like discovering a whole new world. It actually, if you don't mind me saying, Sean, it led me to the greatest compliment I think I've ever had at Kennesaw State. I was giving a presentation finally in the math department, and a few people came up to me and said, you really are a mathematician at heart. And while I love being an economist, that made my career.
Yeah. I mean, the working with Brett was just so satisfying. So Like I said, when I first started working with Brett, I didn't know any auction theory. I didn't know hardly any game theory, other than having done some reading on it, but not really using it in any of my work. And it was just like, I just felt rejuvenation. I got excited about it because I was studying something where I could use, a lot of the stuff that I already knew and was good at, but learning some stuff that I really liked, in particular, the game theory, the probability that we had to use. And the mathematical models that are so satisfying, the ones that are in auction theory, more so than the ones that model diseases and stuff, because there's a lot more certainty in those models. Like the models are more correct just by nature of what we're modeling. And so it was just, in fact, that's what I've been working on ever since then. And that's what I like to do now is the auction theory and the game theory stuff.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I'm going to do a shameless plug for our academic learning center that's currently being built. So one of the things that the president envisioned was, she's very supportive of interdisciplinary research, but she also envisioned that we need to have space for interdisciplinary research. So up on the 5th floor, I think there's an intent for programming specifically around interdisciplinary research that she talked about in one of her Written by Witten. And it's for students, but it's also for faculty. And so I love the story of you all meeting in the Commons to come together and talk about differential equations, but hopefully KSU will have some dedicated space for those types of collaborations to occur in the future when that building's done. There's another great question that's come in. It says, speaking of interdisciplinary work, are you aware of any collaborative work studying the culture, history, and success of the Amish-run mud sale auctions of Lancaster County, Pennsylvania? It's an extremely specific question.
Well, so I know all about these. Just kidding. I've never heard of them. But Allison, I don't know you, but please get on email and let me know, because I'd love to find out what's going on. These are the things that make my life interesting. I'm old and boring.
Well, I'm happy to chime in if you can hear me.
I know.
My parents moved there while I was in college, and that's when I became aware of them and did not know they were so specific to Lancaster County, but all of the fire stations there are volunteer. And so every year they run these auctions to fundraise. And I think they're mostly for things like the firefighters, but then also things like Habitat and Humanity. It's grown to that, but it's all Amish run. And the idea being it's during the winter and spring when the Amish can't be planting. So that's what I meant by the history of where it comes from, and then the culture. And then it's dozens of auctions occurring at the same time, at the same farm, auctioning off everything. Like half my furniture in my office is Amish made furniture from these auctions. So I didn't know if that was something that anyone has ever studied.
I don't know. I'm not familiar with it, but with auctions being conducted at the same time, that is just ripe for us studying it. Something a little different than we normally see, but fits right in there with the standard auction too. So I'm going to look that up as soon as we get offline.
Here's another question that I missed. Do you find the number of bidders has a direct impact on auction results?
Yes. Sometimes.
Sean, you want to take that?
Oh yeah, you can take it.
Okay. Well, yeah. I mean, it does, and that's pretty much just an economic story. That's auctions are a special case of. More competition results in different prices, and for instance, if it's an auction where you want higher prices, inviting more bidders to the auction will result in systematically higher bids, which will result in systematically higher prices that come out. And the same is true if you just reverse it. More bidders will get you a lower price if that's what you're shooting for. But yeah, that and so it's nice when the economics we understand comes out of our auction models, or else we'd be in a little bit of trouble.
We're just about out of time. Does anyone have one more last burning question? Here's a question. Is there a behavioral lab at KSU? Well, there's two that just came in that can be used to run experiments such as auctions is the first one quickly. And then the second one is collusion, a problem in the Medicare auctions.
Okay, so I'm not aware of an experimental lab, but hey, just I know a lot of important people are listening. That would be a great thing to have on campus. And I'm not an experimental person, so that's not self-serving. In terms of collusion, it's always something to think about, but it wasn't really a big concern in the Medicare auctions because these were done in big municipalities, metropolitan areas, where there were going to be a lot of bidders going in. There were even some new people who had never provided these goods who were going to be submitting bids. You need to really be worried about collusion when the bidders know each other and compete against each other fairly often. At the very beginning of the video, I mentioned, should it be an auction where bids are cried out in the open or where sealed bids are submitted? In fact, the reason sealed bid auctions happen is because they help avoid collusion. When bids are cried out in the open, collusive members of a cartel can see each other doing it and enforce the cartel a little better. When bids are sealed, nobody knows that a cartel member has violated the promise to cheat until it's too late. So it's much easier for people to break the collusive agreement. But that is a front and center issue tackled by auction theory. So that's another great question.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. Well, I'm gonna call it a day because I want my weekend to start, and I know you all do too. So I just want to say a big, huge thank you to Brett and Sean. I know you spent a lot of time this last week pulling together the audio for the video that was made and also all the pictures that were included. So thank you, thank you. For those of you who are sticking with us for the month of May, let me tell you about next week's show. We are going to be featuring another interdisciplinary team on campus, Kevin McFall, who is an associate professor of mechatronics engineering. He's also the associate dean for research in that college, which is the Southern Polytechnic College of Engineering and Engineering Technology. And he will be joined by his colleague, Mohammed Al-Adhari, who is an assistant professor of computer science in the College of Computing and Software Engineering. And they will be talking about advances that they're making in autonomous vehicle technology and a considerable amount of training that they're doing with KSU undergraduates. So it's going to be a great show. So again, thank you to our guests. Thank you to Joelle Walls, to Heather, to Stratcom, to UITS for all of their help in getting these shows, if you will, up and running. It's not an easy thing to do. And so I really, really appreciate their time and dedication. On behalf of the Office of Research, we thank you, and we hope you continue to stay healthy, safe, and have a wonderful weekend. Bye.